12,000 years ago, this exact stretch of ground lay buried beneath something almost impossible to picture today. A vast, frigid lake of glacial meltwater, stretching far beyond the shoreline you know now, fed by an ice sheet still retreating somewhere to the north. Where towers will one day pierce the sky, there is only gray, churning water and the distant groan of shifting ice. Nothing living has ever called this exact spot home. Not yet, and not for a very long time still to come. Everything you are about to see happens from one unmoving point of view. The camera never shifts, never tilts, never blinks. Only the land itself moves, compressing 12,000 years into a single unbroken transformation right in front of your eyes. Watch closely, because in the next few minutes, this frozen lakebed becomes one of the most powerful cities on Earth. As the ice sheet continues its slow retreat, the towering glacial lake begins to drain and shrink, exposing wide flats of raw, wet sediment where deep water once stood. The shoreline pulls back stage by stage, leaving behind a lower, smaller lake and a soggy, marshy plain in its place. This plain will one day carry the weight of an entire skyline. By 10,000 years before the Common Era, the exposed lakebed has cooled into a landscape of scattered ponds, reed beds, and open marsh, threaded with the faint beginnings of a slow-moving channel. Small bands of travelers move through this wetland for the first time, following migrating waterfowl along its edges. They build no lasting shelters yet, only quick shelters of bent branches, but their presence marks the very beginning of human history at this exact location. By 9,000 years before the Common Era, scattered prairie grasses take root across the drier ground, while low, hardy shrubs cluster near the water's edge. The travelers who once simply passed through now linger longer, drawn by fish moving through the slow channel and waterfowl nesting thickly in its reeds, a richness of food few other stretches of this land can match. Here is where the story takes its first real turn. By 8,000 years before the Common Era, the first deliberate campfires appear along the channel's bank, reused season after season rather than built fresh each time. This is the earliest sign that people are choosing to return to this precise bend in the water again and again, rather than simply wandering past it. 7,000 years before the Common Era brings the first true woodland to the higher ground nearby. Oak and hickory, rising where only grass and shrub once stood. Simple shelters, framed with bent poles and covered in woven reeds, begin appearing near the water, disassembled and rebuilt with each changing season. By 6,000 years before the Common Era, the slow channel has widened and deepened into something resembling a proper river, and a distinctive wild plant, sharp and pungent, spreads thickly along its marshy banks, filling the air with a smell unlike anything else nearby, one that will one day give this entire location its lasting name. 5,000 years before the Common Era brings semi-permanent camps clustered near the river's edge, their residents gathering that same pungent wild plant in such quantity that it becomes closely tied to how outsiders will one day come to know this place at all. By 4,000 years before the Common Era, small garden plots appear near the camps for the first time, cleared patches of earth where wild plants are tended rather than only gathered. The river channel, meanwhile, has grown wide enough to carry simple canoes with ease. Keep watching, because the next few centuries change everything about how this place is used. By 3,000 years before the Common Era, travelers begin using this exact river channel as a shortcut, a narrow, marshy connection linking waters that flow toward one Great Lakes system with waters that eventually reach a distant, massive river far to the south and west. Word of this shortcut begins to spread. 2,000 years before the Common Era brings larger seasonal camps built specifically to take advantage of this portage route, with canoes hauled overland across the marshy connector during dry stretches when the water itself runs too shallow to paddle. By 1,000 years before the Common Era, this portage crossing has become a recognized and reliable route, worn smooth by generations of use, known to travelers from communities the original camp's residents will never personally meet. The first century brings changes that will echo for 2,000 years. By the year 100, established communities along this river channel maintain fishing weirs, garden plots, and a scatter of longhouse-style dwellings clustered near the portage crossing, their numbers swelling each season when travel along the route peaks. 200 brings expanded trade goods moving through this settlement, carried by travelers using the portage shortcut, connecting this marshy crossing to a trade network stretching farther than any single resident here could imagine. By 300, the community's dwellings have grown more permanent, framed with sturdier poles and covered in tightly woven mats built to withstand the marshy dampness that defines this exact stretch of ground. 400 brings a distinct seasonal rhythm to life here, dense summer camps swelling along the riverbank, then thinning again each winter as families disperse to drier, more sheltered ground further from the water. Those who remain through the coldest months rely on stores gathered during the abundant warmer seasons, a pattern that will repeat, largely unchanged, for centuries to come. 500. The wild pungent plant that gives this crossing its lasting nickname among travelers now grows in such abundance along the riverbanks that its smell, sharp and unmistakable, becomes the first thing many visitors notice upon arrival. By 600, this portage settlement has become one of the most consistently used water crossings in the entire regional trade network, its marshy ground trampled into permanent, well-worn paths. 700 brings larger gathering spaces near the crossing, built specifically to host trade meetings between communities whose home territories lie in completely different directions along the connected waterways. Agreements struck at these gatherings shape how the crossing itself is shared, who travels through during which season, and how disputes over its use are settled peacefully. 800. Storage structures, raised above the damp ground on simple post foundations, appear near the settlement for the first time, protecting gathered food from the flooding that regularly reshapes this low, marshy terrain. Even the placement of these structures reflects generations of hard-won knowledge about exactly how high the water can rise in a bad season. By 900, the portage crossing supports a genuinely diverse seasonal population, different communities arriving at different times of year, each recognizing the unique advantage of this single narrow connection between two entirely different water systems. Disputes over the best fishing grounds near the crossing are settled through long-standing custom rather than open conflict, a testament to how much value every community places on keeping this route open and shared. 1,000 years after the Common Era arrives with the settlement at what may be its historical peak of seasonal activity, canoes constantly moving through the marshy channel, campfires burning along both banks simultaneously. The centuries that follow bring a long, steady rhythm to this crossing. By 1100, expanded fishing weirs stretch across the widened river mouth where it meets the Great Lake beyond, taking advantage of fish populations that gather there in extraordinary numbers each season. Canoe traffic through the portage now moves in something close to a steady procession during the busiest weeks of migration season, one vessel rarely out of sight of another. 1200 brings a noticeably larger permanent population settling near the crossing year-round rather than only seasonally, drawn by the reliable food supply the marshy wetland consistently provides. By 1300, this location has become widely known among travelers specifically for the wild plant that grows so thickly along its banks, its name among outside visitors directly tied to that unmistakable smell. 1400 brings continued stability. The crossing remains busy, the dwellings remain occupied, and the portage route itself remains the fastest known connection between the two great water systems it links. Then the 15th century arrives, and with it, the final stretch of calm before an unimaginable change. By 1500, life at this marshy crossing continues almost exactly as it has for 1,000 years, utterly unaware that far to the east, ships are already being built that will one day change everything about this exact bend in the water. In 1510, nothing here has changed. In 1520, still nothing. But by 1530, faint rumors begin traveling along the trade network. Stories of pale-skinned strangers appearing near the great eastern waters, past community to community until they finally reach this crossing. By 1540, those rumors have grown more frequent and harder to dismiss. And by 1550, an uneasy sense has settled over the crossing, an awareness, however vague, that the wider world is no longer as distant as it once seemed. For the next century, the crossing holds its breath. Then everything changes within a single generation. In the early 1600s, French explorers traveling by canoe become the first outsiders from across the ocean to portage through this exact marshy connection, astonished at how perfectly it links the two water systems they had traveled so far to find. Within decades, French fur traders establish a small seasonal outpost near the river mouth, trading goods with the communities who have used this crossing for generations. By the mid-1700s, the outpost has grown into a modest but genuine trading post, log structures replacing the woven mat dwellings that once dominated this stretch of riverbank. Furs move through here by the thousands, funneled toward distant markets through the same portage route travelers have used for 1,000 years. Traders from several different nations now do business side by side at this single crossing, a level of mixed commerce this ground has never hosted before. Then, in the 1780s, a single ambitious homestead changes this location forever. A trader of African and French descent builds the first substantial permanent farmstead directly at the river's mouth, complete with a proper house, barn, and mill, becoming the first person to make this exact spot his lasting home rather than a seasonal stop. Word of his prosperous outpost spreads quickly among travelers passing through, and within a few short years, his farmstead is widely regarded as one of the most successful trading operations anywhere along the entire portage route. By 1803, a formal wooden stockade fort rises near that same river mouth, its walls and blockhouses replacing the informal trading post that came before it. Soldiers, traders, and their families now live within sight of the very portage marsh that first drew people to this exact ground. A small but genuine military and civilian community taking root where seasonal camps once stood. But the young fort's peace will not last long. In 1812, the fort is destroyed amid the chaos of a widening war, its wooden walls burned, and its buildings reduced to ash in a matter of hours. For 4 years, only the ruins remain, a grim silence settling over the river mouth. Then, in 1816, a new fort rises from the same footprint, sturdier and more permanent than the first. The 1820s bring a scattering of new log cabins near the fort, a handful of families choosing to settle permanently around what is still, at heart, a remote frontier outpost. By 1830, surveyors arrive and lay out a formal street grid for the very first time, transforming the marshy riverside into platted city lots almost overnight. 1833 brings official incorporation as a town, its population still barely more than a few hundred people scattered among wooden storefronts and muddy, unpaved streets. Just 4 years later, explosive growth forces incorporation as a full city, wooden buildings now crowding both banks of the river in tight, hastily built rows, a transformation almost no early resident could have predicted. Watch what happens next, because the growth from here becomes almost impossible to believe. By the mid-1840s, a canal connecting this river directly to the Great River System far to the south finally opens, and cargo boats begin moving through what was once a shallow portage marsh in staggering numbers. Grain, lumber, and livestock now flow through this single crossing in volumes that would have been unimaginable to anyone standing here even 2 decades earlier. The 1850s bring the first railroad tracks converging on this location from every direction, transforming it into the busiest transportation hub in the entire region. Through the 1860s, wooden buildings rise taller and closer together than ever before, entire blocks packed with combustible timber structures built as quickly as lumber can be delivered by rail. By 1870, this location has become one of the fastest-growing cities on the continent, its wooden skyline dense, chaotic, and dangerously flammable, though almost no one here yet appreciates just how dangerous that combination has become. Then, in 1871, disaster strikes. A catastrophic fire sweeps through the city in a single devastating night, consuming block after block of wooden construction and leaving smoldering ruins where thriving neighborhoods once stood. But almost before the ashes cool, rebuilding begins, this time with fireproof brick and iron construction replacing the vulnerable wood of before, an entire generation of builders determined never to let a single spark destroy this much again. By the mid-1880s, a revolutionary new building rises from that rebuilt cityscape, its steel skeleton frame allowing it to climb higher than brick alone ever could, a structure that will one day be recognized as the world's first true skyscraper. Within just a few years, similar steel-framed towers begin rising alongside it, racing each other toward the sky, each architect determined to outdo the last in both height and ambition. 1893 brings a dazzling temporary city of gleaming white exposition halls, built along the lakefront to showcase this location's stunning transformation to millions of visitors from around the world. The temporary halls vanish within months, but the confidence and ambition they represent do not. The turn of the century brings elevated train tracks looping through the heart of downtown for the first time, carrying passengers above streets now crowded with horse carriages, pedestrians, and the earliest automobiles. By 1910, additional skyscrapers crowd the skyline, each one racing to outdo its neighbors in height and architectural ambition. 1920 brings a booming, densely packed downtown, thousands of new residents arriving from across the country and around the world, transforming neighborhoods surrounding the original river crossing at a blistering pace. New arrivals bring new languages, new trades, and new energy to streets that, just a century earlier, held nothing but a single wooden fort and a scatter of log cabins. The 1930s bring visible economic hardship to the crowded downtown streets, even as construction continues on new government and cultural buildings nearby. 1945 brings jubilant crowds filling those same streets, celebrating the end of a devastating global conflict with a scale of joy the city has never witnessed before. The mid-20th century brings changes that will reshape this skyline permanently. By the 1950s, elevated expressways begin cutting through neighborhoods near the original river crossing, reshaping how people and goods move through the heart of the city. The 1960s bring a wave of ambitious new skyscraper construction, each tower more daring in engineering than the one before it. 1973 brings the tallest building in the entire world rising near this exact stretch of skyline, its dark, tiered silhouette instantly becoming the most recognizable landmark for miles in every direction. For nearly a quarter century, no other building on Earth will stand taller, its presence alone enough to redraw this skyline's entire silhouette against the sky. The 1980s and 90s bring continued growth around the original river crossing, glass and steel towers filling in nearly every remaining gap in the downtown skyline. By the new millennium, this location has become one of the most architecturally celebrated skylines on the planet, its dense cluster of towers instantly recognizable worldwide, appearing in films, postcards, and photographs taken by millions of visitors every single year. By 2020, an unprecedented public health crisis empties these normally crowded downtown streets, leaving the towering skyline eerily quiet for the first time in over a century. 2021 brings a slow, cautious return of crowds and traffic, the city's unmistakable energy gradually rebuilding itself block by block. By 2022, downtown streets have returned to their familiar, bustling rhythm, riverwalk paths along the original crossing filled once again with pedestrians, cyclists, and outdoor diners. 2023 brings continued architectural investment along the riverfront, new public spaces integrated directly along the water that first drew travelers here thousands of years earlier, long before anyone here had a word for what this place would eventually become. 2024 brings record crowds to the lakefront and downtown core alike, the skyline glittering above a river crossing that has now hosted continuous human activity for 12,000 uninterrupted years, longer than almost any other single location on the entire continent. By 2025, upgraded infrastructure and modern lighting illuminate the Riverwalk long after sunset, honoring nearly 2 centuries of rebuilding on ground that goes back so much further still. And now, in 2026, standing at this exact vantage point, it is almost impossible to imagine that this same ground once lay buried beneath a vast glacial lake, once held nothing but marsh grass and a narrow portage trail, once burned to the ground in a single catastrophic night, and once gave rise to the very first skyscraper the world had ever seen. 12,000 years, captured in a single unbroken line of sight. And this skyline, quite obviously, is still climbing.